So I want to talk to you about something called prolonged tension. Prolonged tension is where we have a chord or some sort of tense sound happening and we prolong it. We keep it tense before we resolve. And there's one really great way to do that using diminished chords and dominant chords. So I want to bring something to your attention. Anytime you're using a diminished chord, this sound very much relates to dominant seventh chords. After all, a dominant seventh chord is a 5, let's say we're in C minor, 5 to 1, 5 to 1, right? So G major is our 5. But it also has on the top three notes the diminished chord built off of the 7th scale degree. You put those two chords together, you get a dominant seventh chord. So this, again, this diminished sound relates to the dominant seventh sound. So much so that if we take a diminished seventh chord and we lower any one of those four notes by a semitone, you get a new dominant seventh chord, usually in an inversion. And the resolution options for the dominant chords and the diminished chords are the same. Let's talk about it in detail so you can use this device for prolonged tension within your modulations. So as we've discussed before, diminished chords have plenty of places they can resolve. For right now, let's just talk about resolving to minor chords. So diminished seventh chords, or diminished chords in general, tend to resolve up a semitone. And because any diminished chord represents 4 different diminished chords because they have the same notes, you can resolve up a semitone from any one of these 4 notes. Again, if this is confusing, go back to the class on diminished modulations and it should help sort things out. But breezing over it a little bit, this chord can resolve up a semitone from C to C sharp, up a semitone from E flat to E, up a semitone from F sharp to G, or up a semitone from A to B flat. So the 4 options we have in this minor environment would be modulating to C sharp minor, E minor, G minor, or B flat minor. Try your best to remember that because in a second, we're going to talk about how the dominant chords will also take us to those 4 keys. If I take this diminished chord, and like I said, I can lower any one of these 4 notes. I'm going to lower the bottom note first down to a B. That gives us which chord? B dominant 7. And where does B dominant 7 go? It goes down a 5th, in this case, to E, and we'll play E minor. But remember, this diminished chord, E minor, was one of the options. So we lowered the semitone, and it's just another way to get to that E minor. We've prolonged the tension with a diminished chord, and then a dominant chord, still tense, and then to E minor. I could also lower this note here, E flat, down to a D. Where does D dominant 7 take us? This is 3rd inversion, keep in mind, but it's D dominant 7, just the same. Takes us down a 5th from D down to G, and in this case we'll play G minor. Again, from this diminished chord, G minor, or G major, but G in general was one of our options as a modulation. Next, I'm going to lower the F sharp down to F. That gives us F dominant 7, which would take us to B flat. Again, B flat was one of our options also from the diminished chord. So we get this, to this, to this, to the B flat. And then lastly, I can lower the top note A down to A flat dominant 7, takes us to D flat. And lastly, yet again, this C was showing us in the diminished chord that we can move to this D flat. So whether you're using C diminished 7 to move to D flat minor up a semitone, you can also lower that top note in this case to a dominant chord to take you to D flat minor. So while there's other ways that you can use prolonged tension, this is one of my favorites. Taking a diminished chord and turning it into a dominant, and the reverse can be true as well. We take B dominant, raise the bottom note a semitone, and then we can still modulate to E using that diminished chord. So this is a totally reversible process, but quite often I'll go from diminished to dominant and then resolve. That's just a personal preference, but keep in mind it does work both ways. So to me, this class kind of feels like a bonus class, just in that we're using 2 chords kind of back to modulate. But this idea of prolonged tension had to be mentioned because as a general concept, it does get used quite a bit in music. So continue to explore diminished 7th chords, dominant 7th chords, and the other chords that we've talked about within this course to see how you can use prolonged tension within your compositions and chord progressions. So whether you're taking a diminished 7th chord and shifting it into a dominant, or a dominant 7th chord and shifting it into a diminished 7th chord as a way of using prolonged tension, I hope you can get a lot of use out of this technique. I've used this technique plenty of times, and now you can too. I'll see you in the next class.